Welcome, everyone, to the onpoli podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, the legislature has broken for its summer break, but we won't see these folks again until October. Why so long?
We'll set up the Premier's meeting in Ontario next month as Doug Ford welcomes his fellow provincial First Ministers to Muskoka.
First, it was the California wildfires that devastated so much of the Golden State. Then came Alberta's turn. Now Ontario has its own out-of-control fire crisis.
And for your column, my column, I've got a pair of housing pieces to talk about.
And I look back at one of the most improbable election victories ever. It happened 30 years ago last Sunday and ushered in what they called a common sense revolution.
It's Friday the 13th of June, 2025, so let's get to it.
JMM, little
Sure.
sugar to start with. You suffering from any triskaidekaphobia today?
No, I'm not.
You know what that is, right?
Yes, it is fear of. Is it fear of the number 13?
Exactly.
Yes.
And Friday the 13th is supposed to be doubly problematic.
Yes, for whatever reason, unless you are in Port Dover, Ontario, where
Right.
they always have this celebration and a meeting of bikers, and I think they now do like concerts and stuff. So yeah, Port Dover, I hope you're having fun today.
Now, I don't want to make any connections between bikers and Godzilla, who's on your T-shirt today, but what is...
So I don't have Friday the 13th, also a series of horror films that were very popular when I was a child.
Right.
I don't have a Jason in the hockey mask Friday the 13th t-shirt, so I defaulted back to Godzilla.
What about a Freaky Friday thing with Jamie Lee Curtis and, I'm blanking now. Who else was in that Freaky
Lindsay
Friday?
Lohan?
Lindsay Lohan, yeah, thank you.
No, and only after I left the house today did it occur to me, actually, I could have worn my NASA t-shirt and we could have done Apollo 13.
Ah,
but no.
Too late.
Yeah,
you
too
thought
late.
about it too late.
But I know who's on your shirt.
You do know who is on my shirt. I suspect this is the first Ontario election you covered. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so we'll remind everybody that yesterday was June the 12th. 11 years ago, June the 12th, 2014, Kathleen Wynne won a majority government for the Ontario Liberals. It was obviously an election of incredible historic significance because, let me state the obvious, she was the first woman leader in Ontario history to win a general election. She became the 25th Premier of Ontario the year before when she won a convention at Maple Leaf Gardens, or at least what we used to call Maple Leaf Gardens, Mattamy Athletic Centre. And it was a year later that she won that historic election. I had a chance to talk to Premier Wynne for this thing I think we talked about last week, the Premier's Archive, where we've got an archive coming online of interviews with all the living ex-premiers. And we talked about what for her was clearly a magical night in 2014, 11 years ago yesterday. Kathleen Wynne. Did you know election night you were going to win?
My team, I think, did. I think, I was less convinced of that. Certainly not convinced we were going to get a majority. That was, and we didn't have a huge majority. I think it was like 4 or 5 seats in the end. I was definitely hopeful that we'd be able to eke out a win, but would we get to a majority that was actually comfortable enough for us to govern? I didn't know that for sure.
And when you saw that you did?
That was pretty exciting. It was one of those moments where you'd sort of pinch yourself and think, okay, did this really happen? And we'd worked so hard and the team was so happy, and it felt like a huge validation, Steve, of the work that we had done. I can tell you on election night, it was more than pretty exciting for Wynne and her team because, well, as we suggested, it was historic. And here, can you see the shirt there? Maybe I got to stand up a little bit just to show a little better. That's Kathleen Wynne from her portrait at Queen's Park, where she is. You look down the aisles and there's 24 white men who have been previous premiers, and then number 25, the one and only woman. And that was your first election, right, that you covered?
Yes, that was the first election I covered as a Queen's Park reporter. But you may recall the 2011 election, TVO did a watch party for the election results that night at a bar in downtown Toronto. And that election, that was the first time you and I met, was in that bar on the 2011 watch party.
That's the one where Dalton McGuinty came 1 seat short of a third consecutive majority.
Yes.
Huh. That's our first meeting, eh?
That was the first time we met in person.
How about that?
So,
obviously more meaningful for you than it was for me, because I don't remember that. No, kidding.
But no, the 2014 election, the other thing I will say is, so if you were with the Liberals that night, I was with the Tories. I was at Tim Hudak's it did not turn out to be a celebration.
No.
And I was, the way these nights go, all of the reporters are lined up with our laptops on a table somewhere. And as she alluded to, like, we weren't quite sure whether it was going to be a majority, a minority.
Well, she didn't get 40% of the vote. It was a tad under 40, and usually you need 40 to get a majority.
Yeah, I think it was like 37 point something in the end. But so, we were all writing, and none of us quite knew, like, are we writing for a majority, whatever. And we didn't know how long the night was going to be. Were we going to have to wait hours and hours for like a handful of seats to decide the fate of the legislature? And no, the way those results came in that night, that was one of the things I always remember, is a bunch of us were like, oh, well, we thought this was going to be a long night, and it is not.
Yeah. So, I just looked it up now, 38.67%.
Yeah.
So it was really, for the Liberals, a perfect split to get a majority government with only 38.67% of the total vote.
And as she said in the clip there, a narrow majority, but a majority is enough.
A majority is a majority is a majority. That's the way it goes. Okay, anything else, or should we get on with the show?
Let's get moving.
Let's do it. Off to issue one. It is not unusual for the Ontario legislature to take its summer break in June. However, it is unusual for the House not to resume sitting until October. That's a 4-month break for government ministers from the rigors of question period, which of course is the main way the opposition keeps the government accountable in our system. Okay, obvious question, JMM. Why such a long break?
Well, of course, Government House Leader Steve Clark was defending the government on this point when they were debating the various time allocation motions in the last week of the legislature. And he said, they have, I'm going to quote the government here, they have accomplished so much in just I guess it was 7 weeks since they returned from the election in the spring. They had introduced and passed a budget. They have passed some major bills like Bill 5, despite lots of vocal opposition. They've passed a handful of other key government bills, and they've also introduced some more bills that will potentially get some hearing over the summer. They're going to fan out now across the province, and they will, of course, do the we've got Ford Fest coming this weekend,
right.
But then they will do other, I'm sure, community events, fundraisers, and just to generally do a victory lap, and not just for the legislative session, but of course I do think a lot of MPPs are also still winding down from the election earlier this year.
That's right. We have to remember it was only a few months ago that everybody went to the polls and the weather was not great. And, it's no one wanted to be door knocking in the middle of February, but that's in fact what they were doing in the Feb 28 general election.
Doug Ford clearly wanted to. Nobody forced him.
That's a fair point. Now, I guess we should hammer this home a little bit. There is a sense out there that when the House is not sitting, members are not working. Right. And to be sure, over the summer, I'm sure they're going to take some time off, as you pointed out, given how rigorous the first 6 months of the years have been. But to say they're on vacation from now until October really isn't fair, is it?
No, I mean, there's always, constituency work that MPPs do. There's a lot of this stuff that doesn't really happen in the public eye, but, MPPs help their constituents interface with the government, right? Like, hey, I'm a small business owner. I'm waiting on a provincial permit here. Can you help me with X, Y, or Z? Connect me with the minister. Those are the kinds of things that that MPPs do. That's outside of the public eye, but it's an extremely valuable part of their job. Frankly, I think for a lot of MPPs, it's the part of the job they like most. It's really the retail side of provincial political service. So it's not at all that they are taking a 4-month vacation, but it is also the case that, as you alluded to at the top, facing the legislature and facing the opposition is also part of the government's job. That is the thing we expect them to do in our constitutional system, and at least this part of the job, the government is giving itself a 4-month break from.
Indeed. And, you leave yourself open to criticism from the opposition when you do something like that, when you take a particularly long time before bringing the House back. And needless to say, the opposition was not too happy about that fact, because question period is really their chance to shine. Yeah. Our good pal Martin Redcon from the Toronto Star noted in a recent column that MPPs this year will have sat in the legislature for 13 out of 52 weeks.
Yeah.
13 out of 52 weeks in all of 2025. Now, he thinks this will help the Ford government avoid antagonism, for example, related to Bill 5, which of course just turned into a bit of a foo-for-ah. What do you think?
I'd like to connect this to the pay raise and the pension vote that we talked about last week. You and I have talked about this issue a lot. I think we're both on the record at this point saying that this was a long time coming. MPPs were underpaid. MPPs, frankly, deserved a pension in as much as, city councillors and federal MPs already had pensions. It did not make sense anymore for MPPs to go without a pension. But the combination of doing that vote and then immediately voting to take this 4-month break from the legislature. Again, it's not that they're going on vacation, but like the government is very clearly giving itself a bit of a 4-month treat here immediately after giving themselves a raise. I think the optics are kind of terrible.
Just kind of terrible.
Just kind of terrible.
Okay, having said all of that, they are going to come back in October. Want to give us a little scene setter about what we can anticipate then?
Right. So just as there is always a budget in the spring, there will be a mini budget, a fall economic statement in the fall. They will undoubtedly have that's the kind of bill that you hang all sorts of things on. So that will be a very important bill for the government to pass. But they did also introduce a bunch of government bills right before the House rose. The way the legislative calendar works is that committees can meet before the House formally returns. So it's at least possible that some of these might get consideration by committees before they go back to the House for a vote. But some of these bills that will not be possible for because they just got introduced too late. But, the government has reintroduced its bill to change the organization of Peel Region. This has been an ongoing issue now for many years, of course. They every year, or at least once a year, or sometimes twice a year, they introduce a red tape reduction bill, except, of course, with the theme of the current legislature. This one is called the Protect Ontario by Reducing Red Tape. Energy Minister Stephen Lecce also introduced a bill to make changes to the electricity system. Also this week, they did announce a new integrated energy plan. I think we're going to have to talk about that more next week because that's a bit of a meatier thing. But these are all bits of legislation that are pretty important that the government is going to want to see make some serious passage in the fall.
All stuff we can look forward to when we come back after the 4-month break.
Yes.
My goodness. And with that, off to issue 2. The Council of the Federation summer meeting this year will take place next month in Huntsville, Ontario, which for those of you watching or listening outside of the province is in the Muskoka region where Premier Doug Ford has a cottage. At the meeting, they will discuss quote-unquote nation-building projects. That is, if they can get to the meeting, because it seems like an ideal gathering to blockade, if you were so inclined. So, what do they have up their sleeves to deal with that?
Making mischief there at all. I will say that Huntsville, my association, aside from the connection with the Premier, my association with Huntsville is always that it was where the G20 meeting was held before that meeting came to Toronto.
Yes, in 2010.
In 2010, and that became a whole thing that we don't need to go into here.
Remember the gazebos?
Yes.
How much did they spend on those gazebos?
Oh, millions of dollars, and butter smooth asphalt for the entire region, as I recall. Council of the Federation, one of the big things that the premiers will be talking about, certainly here in Ontario, the premier will talk about what he hopes to accomplish with Bill 5. This was the bill, we've talked about it a lot, the Protect Ontario by Unleashing Its Economy Act. The government wants to use these powers to get special projects approved, but Indigenous groups are already quite upset about the passage of the bill. They say it threatens their constitutional rights, and they have in fact threatened blockades, both road and rail blockades. Environmental groups are worried about the government's ability to override environmental protections for animal habitats and ecologically sensitive areas of the province. As I mentioned, Indigenous people, they want guarantees of consultation and meaningful consultation.
Which the Supreme Court guarantees.
Yes, the Supreme Court and the Constitution both say these things are non-negotiable, but the Supreme Court also says that Indigenous people are not guaranteed an outcome, right? They are required to be consulted, but they don't get, to put it colloquially, they don't get a veto.
Right.
And how the government navigates that will be, and navigate all of this, clearly the possibility for very noisy acrimony, how they navigate this will be worth watching.
Well, the Council of the Federation sounds like a Star Trek term, which is why you and I like that title.
Yes, very much.
But essentially, it's just basically the premiers of the country all getting together. That's what the council is.
Yes.
Premier Mark Carney obviously is going to keep a very close eye on this. There we go. Thank you. I was going to say I didn't mean to demote him, but in some cases, that would not be a demotion. Anyway, he has talked, obviously, a great deal about going forward on some nation-building projects that have been sort of delayed over the last decade. And there was a bit of news on that front last week. Why don't you bring us up to scratch on that?
Right. So we got the text of Carney's Bill C5. Now, this you're going to have to keep clear that there is the Ford government's Bill 5 and there is the federal government's Bill C5. But they are very similar pieces of legislation. One bit of Bill C5 is to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers that happen to fall in federal jurisdiction. The other, and this is where it's similar to the Ford government's bill to create special economic zones, this would allow the federal government to designate projects as national interest projects, and fundamentally does the same stuff as Bill 5. It allows them to exempt these national interest projects from various bits of federal legislation in the hopes of getting them much faster approvals. One big difference between the two pieces of legislation is that Bill C5's powers actually come with an expiry date. They expire after 5 years. Bill C5 also requires that Cabinet consult provincial premiers or Indigenous groups that might be affected by any particular national project, but it does not require their consent. It just requires that they be consulted. So that has just been introduced. It has not been passed by the Commons. Mark Carney has an obstacle that somebody like Doug Ford does not, in that he also has to get it through a Senate. He has said in the press conference where they introduced this bill that he would love to see it passed by before the federal parliament rises for the summer. That is not entirely within his hands, right? Like he has to get it through a Senate, and the Senate is filled with people he did not pick because he just hasn't been around that long. So we'll see how it goes.
Should we show up at the Council of the Federation meeting in a couple of Star Trek tunics? What do you think?
I think of the 13 premiers, there must be at least one who would enjoy the humor there. I'm not sure that Ontario's premier would get the joke. I'm not sure he's much of a Star Trek fan.
Doesn't give me that vibe, but you never know.
Yeah, you never know.
You never know. That's right. Okay, let's get on to issue 3. Things have been looking a little hazy over the last week as wildfire smoke rolled across the province. This has become a perennial issue, and sadly, we can expect more as summer continues. Prime Minister Carney sent in the Canadian Armed Forces to help evacuate more than 900 people from the northern community of Sandy Lake First Nation last week. And we've got some footage of what some construction workers faced up there. Let's take a look.
What? It's gonna get harder real long, boys. And there's gonna be explosions, so be careful.
That is just astonishing footage. And I can remember, gosh, how long ago was it? I think it was 1989. I was at CBC at the time, and I was a kind of a summer fill-in reporter in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Right. They sent me out there to backfill for someone. And, being a kid from Southern Ontario, you don't see a lot of these widespread forest fires. And I sort of wondered to myself, how does a fire start on one side of a highway and then literally go over to the other side of the highway? And like an idiot, I didn't know how that happened until I actually watched it happen before my very eyes. Yeah. It was a perfectly calm day, and then all of a sudden, a gust of wind came up and literally picked up a whole bunch of pine needles and transported them across the highway, and the fire just continued across the highway. It's one of the most terrifying situations you can find yourself in. Yeah. Anyway, they tried to build a fire break to contain that fire there. They quickly found themselves surrounded. Everybody thankfully survived all that. But it does raise some questions about what the province of Ontario is doing or is able to do under these circumstances. What do you know?
So back in March, the province said it had filled 100 new permanent positions to help fight forest fires. The government has been criticized in recent years for not spending enough on wildland fires. The government has also ordered 6 more water bombers in addition to the 9 that already exist. The budget for wildland fires keeps fluctuating because some fire seasons are worse than others. The allocated budget for firefighting this year has shrunk from $177 million to $135 million. That said, the Finance Minister, Peter Bethlen-Falvey, has said the government does have a contingency fund so they can increase the amount of money they spend for northern firefighting as needed. They have also partnered with the federal government for $64 million in funding. The area that has burned this year is already 38 times higher compared to last year. So these fires are already enormous. And I do just want to make the point here that, it was considered, and it was a major accomplishment when we saw a major reduction in smog days. And some summers we went entirely without smog days.
Yes.
And this, where we are now in Ontario, right? Like the air quality in Toronto is not getting worse because of smog. It's because forest fires are now so large and burning so uncontrolled that we're getting forest fire smoke here in Toronto.
It's so strange, isn't it? We finally shut down all the coal-fire electricity generation stations and thought smog days are behind us, and yet here we are with new reasons for smog days. I wanted to ask you about water bombers because, of course, you need water bombers to put this stuff out. What are the odds on getting that kind of equipment into use here?
Well, they want them. We could certainly use them, but there's a high demand for them and not enough to go around. And then you've also got pilots, technicians. These are large planes. They take a lot of maintenance. OPSU, the union that represents the government's aviation workers, rejected an offer that would have made Ontario, they say, would have made Ontario second to last in terms of wages for these kinds of pilots and technicians. The union argues that a lack of good wages makes attracting new pilots difficult, and it makes it difficult to retain existing ones. So they put a notice up on their site. They said that there is at least one plane in Sault Ste. Marie that is sitting on the tarmac because there just are not enough personnel to use it. And this, of course, is a repeating story in Ontario that, it does not matter how many hospitals you build, how many beds you have, how many schools you build, how many classrooms you have. You need nurses, you need doctors, you need teachers, and you need the pilots for the water bombers.
Indeed. Okay. Best wishes, obviously, to everybody in Northern Ontario.
Absolutely,
let's hope
yes.
everybody gets through this okay. In the meantime, off to your column, my column. You know this regular feature we present here on onpoli. We call it Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I have a little chat about the columns that we wrote for TVO.org over the past week, and I gather you've got double trouble for us this week.
I do, indeed. Double jeopardy, perhaps. Both of my columns on the website this week are about different aspects of housing. The first is about some items that are going before Toronto City Council this week. By the time this goes to air, they will have already been debated. Going to committee, I should say, about making it easier to build multiplex housing, right? 3 apartments in a home, 4 apartments in a home. The city is looking at rules that would make it allowable much more broadly. But one of the items that was in this committee report, buried in the committee report, was that while they are making it permissible to build up to 3 stories for these types of buildings, they can't build to 4 stories unless there are changes to the provincial building code.
Uh-huh.
The province has said it's looking at allowing 4 stories for townhouses for like a single family home, but the premier has expressed his skepticism, his antipathy.
I think the word you're looking for is outright opposition.
Outright opposition to the slogan that some housing advocates have used is like 4 stories and 4 plexes and 4 stories, right? Allow 4 units and in a single building, in a 4-story tall building. You know, it would be good if the province could make these changes to the building code, because, as I argue in the piece, basically we need to figure out ways to give people square feet. As people get wealthier, it's not like the most romantic way to describe a home, but like as people get wealthier, they just want more space. And this is a way to do that efficiently. Separately, my second column was speaking with Peter Gilligan of Mattamy Homes, who is for the second time going to try basically prefabricated housing. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, Mattamy, under a brand called Stellumar, they would pre-assemble it, like build a home entirely inside a factory, and then they would like tractor the home out to the site and like plunk it down onto the foundation. And it didn't work, or at least that didn't endure, because basically people are fussy about the finishes they want in their homes, and as Mr. Gilligan explained to me, basically, all of that complexity made it just too difficult to do that profitably. But he's going to try again. This week they announced that they are looking at modular mid-rise homes, like 6-story apartment buildings that they will assemble out of modules built in a factory. And their hope is that they could go from getting the planning permission from the city to handing over keys to a new young family, perhaps, who's just looking to get their first home, that they could do that within a year.
Wouldn't that be great?
It would be great. Lots of companies have tried to make this work. Most have not succeeded, but this is exactly the kind of thing that both the provincial and federal government are very, very interested in right now. So I think, quite aside from whatever your housing situation is at right now, both at Queen's Park and in Ottawa, there are people wishing him a lot of luck.
Do you know why Peter Gilligan, apropos of nothing, called his company Mattamy Homes?
No.
It's called Mattamy Homes because he named it after 2 of his kids, Matt and Amy. And we had a representative from Mattamy Homes on the agenda not too long ago, and I asked him, what do the other 4 kids think about the fact that they're not named in any of the...
Well, but so the Stellumar brand.
There you go.
That's his other kids.
Those are
Yes.
that's right. Those are the letters from the other kids' names, Stellumar.
Yes.
So all 6 kids are taken care of, I gather. So there's peace in the household.
Now that's the Stellumar brand has been revived.
There we go.
How about you?
Well, you remember last week we talked about the fact that I think it was about more than 100 people gathered at the Albany Club for a 30th anniversary reunion of the Mike Harris improbable election victory from 1995, the so-called Common Sense Revolution victory. It was really, I have to say, for the people who showed up at this thing, I think a very trippy and fun reunion for them. I wrote a column about it. I mentioned the fact that these people were very glad to see each other. They have been in the trenches for a long time. Some of them hadn't seen each other in a very long time. I also mentioned that there were some failings in the Mike Harris years, and I mentioned those in my column as well. But I did not dwell on those. I dwelled on the fact that these people were coming together. And we've got some pictures here. Why don't we just go through some of these pictures? And now that's Jamie Watt, who's head of Navigator now, one of the crisis communication, I guess, better known firms in this country. And Jamie was there as part of the original Common Sense Revolution group. And there's 2 other guys, Tom Long on the left, Alistair Campbell on the right. Again, the idea was, usually you go to the Albany Club and you got to be suit and tie, or at least suit and collared shirt. But they said, wear your campaign stuff today. We're breaking the rules. So those guys were obviously very influential in Mike Harris's inner circle. Okay, that's Fred. Fred drove the bus.
Right.
Freddie drove the bus, and Freddie was there and just, having a great time reminiscing about how things were back in the day. It was great to see Freddie again. Premier Mike Harris seated in the back there, while Doug Ford went to the lectern to say that in his view, Mike Harris was the best premier in Ontario history. That's what Doug Ford said. And the 2 men have a bit of a connection in as much as Doug Ford's father was a member of Mike Harris's caucus, and now Mike Harris's son, Mike Jr., is a minister in Doug Ford's government. And in fact, he has the natural resources portfolio, which of course, let's bring it full circle, Mike Harris, the dad, had in Frank Miller's government. So they were both, you got two natural resources ministers named Mike Harris in Ontario history. That's Leslie Noble on the left. Leslie Noble and Tom Long both giving speeches. Leslie, again, part of the inner circle back in the day. Oh, gosh, okay. I'm using my moderator's prerogative here to show this. 22 years ago, I launched a book, and I can't even remember which one it was, but I thought, how about Mike Harris showed up to the book launch, and I thought, how about I hand my baby daughter to Mr. Harris, and we'll take a little picture. And I thought, why don't we reprise the picture 22 years later? That's my daughter Julia on the right, and there's Mike Harris, now 80 years old, on the left. I think he still looks pretty darn good, I got to say.
After 80.
And yeah, time does march on. I want to say one last thing about this, and that is not only who was there, but who wasn't there. Part of the inner circle back in the day was a guy named John Mikatishin, whom we've had on TVO multiple times over the years. John was not at this event because, quite shockingly, he's 66 years old. He had emergency open heart surgery just a few days before this event was to take place, and therefore he obviously could not come. John is still recovering in hospital. To the best of my knowledge, I saw him last weekend. He is in a coma still and has not yet come out of it. So, John, we are sending all of our prayers to you and your family. Carol and his daughter and I saw each other last weekend, and we're hoping he pulls through. We want more good news to come out of Hamilton General Hospital because John was a charter member of the Common Sense Revolution and a good guy, and, you know, we want to see him again up and at him.
Absolutely.
Okay, shall we go to the mailbag?
Let's do
that. If you've got a burning question or insightful comment, please send it along to onpolitics@tvo.org. Start us off, JMF.
We have a comment from listener Ian J., who had some interesting facts about milk, likely after seeing my shirt from last week where I had the bagged milk. He writes, I worked for a dairy distributor in the summertime in the mid-'70s. We were already producing milk in bags with imperial measures. The transition to metric measures took place at our dairy in 1977. Oddly, we kept the 3-bag model inside the bigger bag, but now supplied 4 liters spread over the 3 bags. Another major change occurred. The plastic crates that held the product we delivered were also smaller than the imperial crates. This caused great consternation with university students because the new crate was too small to hold LP records. Do we need to explain to our listeners what LP records were?
Maybe for the younger ones, you might
vinyl's back, right?
Vinyl's
People know
back.
what
They know what long play records are.
The crates were owned by the dairies, but being obsolete for commercial purposes, they became prized possessions because the metric ones were just no good. I still have a bunch of prized vinyl, and yes, they are in those crates. The agenda is so special, I wish it could go on forever. Ian J.
Ian, that's a lovely note, thank you. And maybe you're too young to have done this, but that anybody my age, I guarantee you, used those crates to put their LPs in. I'm certainly one of them. You never did because you never owned LPs.
No, I never owned LPs. I owned some cassette tapes, and then everything since whatever 1995 has been CDs for me.
Yeah. It wouldn't work with cassette tapes. It's just not the same.
No,
not the same.
Oh God, I saw an 8-track machine on a garage sale last weekend, and my kid was like, "What is that?" And I was just like, "I don't even know where to start explaining this to you."
8 tracks, boy. I remember 8 tracks. That was part of my childhood. I do indeed. Give the email and let's get out of here.
Absolutely. Again, if you'd like to ask about content on the show, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
And that is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, the 13th of June, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're always happy to hear it. Good, bad, or indifferent, write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org. Please include your first and last name and where you're located.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Matthew O'Mara, video editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Our managing editor is Katie O'Connor. Lori Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
Special thanks, as always, to our studio crew here in the room. Hi, David. Hi, Ian. Hi, Tina. Thanks for showing up today, guys, and keeping us in focus and looking good. And until next Friday, everybody, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.